Welcome back to Research Methodology. In the previous discussion, I guided you about how to write a research proposal. So far in this course, I have talked about some basic ideas related to research, and this was to help you develop a sound understanding of preliminaries of the course. From today onwards, I'll be speaking about practical research writing itself, which means, in simple words, I'll be speaking at length about how to write different chapters of your thesis. So during these discussions, I'll be offering you detailed guidelines on how to write introduction of your thesis, literature review of your thesis, methodology, discussion, and then conclusion. So we'll be dealing with all these chapters one by one and in sufficient detail. So today I'll be talking about what is a thesis, its brief introduction, what are different purposes of this academic activity, the difference between thesis and dissertation, and finally two types of thesis, minor thesis and major thesis. Now this is going to be the focus of today's discussion, because here I want to again guide you about the very basic understanding of research, which most people, especially the beginner researchers, cannot understand, remain confused about, and that is why this confusion breeds a lot of anxiety, making them feel as if they're incapable of doing it in the first place. Let's look at what is a thesis. A thesis is an extended argument demonstrating logical, structured, and defensible reasoning based on credible and verifiable evidence presented in such a way that it makes an original contribution to knowledge. Now there are actually three things I want to elaborate on with relevance to this definition of a thesis. First is the idea that it is a long argument, and I'll be explaining what an argument means in a minute. The second thing that you need to understand about this definition is that it is based on reasoning. You have to provide convincing, solid evidence backing up your argument. So research is not about simply your own personal opinion that is unjustifiable, that has no reasoning behind it. Although your viewpoint might not be universally or largely accepted by all the people, but it should be good enough to be acceptable for others to listen to. So if your argument is not well founded, it does not have enough evidence to support it, this is simply something that does not fall in the domain of research. And the third is that it should make an original contribution to knowledge. In simple words, contribution here means that your research should actually somehow, let's say, add something to the already existing research. It should not be simply a summary or reproduction of the current knowledge. It should bring in something that is not already known. Now, this is quite a simplistic explanation of original contribution. I'll be talking in detail about how contribution can be established in research. Here, another idea that you should understand is a term that is frequently used by researchers and supervisors: thesis statement. Simply speaking, thesis statement is a statement summarizing the central idea of the research. Or in other words, the basic main idea of your research is what we call a thesis statement. But this idea should be expressed in the form of a complete sentence making complete sense to the listener. In other words, it is simply a sentence talking about what this research is all about. Second thing, what are the purposes of academic research? Why are we conducting this effort demanding, time consuming, and sometimes anxiety causing activity? What do we want to achieve through this exercise? Why are the students supposed to do research? And remember, if you consult my previous discussions on research, especially where I introduced research in my earlier discussions, I tried to remind you of the fact that at this stage, research becomes the soul of this whole educational activity. The coursework itself is meant to equip you with certain skills and with some background knowledge, helping you to successfully accomplish this upcoming task, that is writing your research thesis. So here I'll be looking at a few purposes of this academic research. Research that is conducted by students under the supervision of their teachers. First thing, that through this activity the students are actually moving on from research consumption to research production. This is a kind of intellectual growth and progress that is expected of students. Now let me explain what this idea means. Research consumption means that for a number of years in academia, while getting education, the students rely on research works produced by other scholars. They consume research. They use ideas articulated and produced by other scholars. But at this moment, they are actually expected to move beyond this dependence of ideas on other people and be able to put forward some of their own profound ideas. So it is basically to enable students to formulate their own ideas and write them down in the form of a formal organized document. Now this is actually the sole and the central purpose of any research program or degree, to facilitate the students to move from research consumption to research production. And this is actually the goal that is imposed, that is expected from the students to achieve through this academic research. Second purpose of academic research is they should be able to use libraries effectively to locate relevant materials. Now this is again a skill in itself, since after completing your degree, a degree that is meant for research, the degree holder should not only be intellectually independent and mature, the way I have just explained, this idea of pushing the students beyond research consumption and enable them for research production. So this research production does not simply mean that you are sitting idle on a roof and thinking about whatever crosses your mind and write it down. This research production needs many other skills and activities, and one of them is your ability to use library sources. The student should be able to navigate his way through different available sources in the library and use them to develop a sound understanding of the topic that he is studying, and then with the help of these library sources he should be able to compile ideas and produce something worthwhile in the form of research. So this is again another purpose. The third purpose is to enable these beginner researchers to write up a sustained and logically structured academic argument in clear prose. So here you can see we have now moved from abstract purposes of research towards concrete ones, that through this process of locating relevant sources, collecting ideas, they should be able to write all these ideas down in a structured argument, in the form of an argument that is organized, that is ordered, and it certainly needs some writing skills. So these skills of writing can be practically learned if the students are supposed to write something. by simply teaching them theory or guiding them about different writing skills, they will not be able to achieve anything practically. So here you can see that academic research is actually a set of multiple skills, and all of them very necessary for a mature, serious scholar. And uh, it does not mean that somehow all of uh, the graduates are going to become scholars, but at least these people who have spent substantial time in academia should find themselves intellectually independent and confident of the solidity and validity of their ideas, and contribute to the progress of society and humanity at large. So they can use these these skills, maturity of understanding, these writing skills in thousands of ways. Similarly, another purpose of academic research is familiarity with and use of appropriate scholarly conventions of research. Now here we are talking about dozens of formalities and technicalities, rules and prescriptions which a graduate should be able to understand and observe in his writing. Now these are rules and formalities which are expected of a researcher in the community of scholars. And as we move on, we'll be discussing many of these ideas in different contexts, but here let me just add one thing and then we'll move on to the next point. These formalities are not for the sake of sophistication or a pretense of scholarship. Rather, they have their own purposes to justify their existence, and one of the very easily understandable purpose is uniformity in research writing. If all the research community is following certain agreed upon conventions and formalities, it becomes easy for other scholars to understand these things. For instance, let me here give you an example, although it is an independent topic in research. In research, we talk about how to cite different sources that the scholar has consulted while reading, analyzing, and collecting the data. So these sources can be documented in a certain acceptable pattern and method. If you violate certain formalities within the method, even this will be considered incorrect, and this will be rejected immediately by your supervisor and obviously by the scholarly community at large. So you have to follow these prescriptions and rules as they are unanimously established by a large community of scholars. Although there are certain fuzzy gray areas where we do not have and this is true of you know, anything, I guess, not only research itself. Although there are multiple hundreds of guidelines available for all of us, but as an individual and as a scholar in a certain context, you sometimes decide things on your own where you do not have a very clear and definite instructions binding you to do things in a certain way. But at other time you have certain rules that you cannot violate, and I have just given you one such example, that of citation. So citation simply means there are multiple ways in which a scholar is supposed to document the source that he has used for some of his ideas. So in citation we have, you know, uh, instructions about how to document if you have used a book for some of your ideas, if you have referenced an article, it should be documented in a different way. So this documentation, this referencing, this mentioning of sources is called citation, and we'll be talking in great detail about many of these ideas in our upcoming discussions. Another point that is you know, important is the difference between thesis and dissertation, because most of the time these two words are used interchangeably and they become sometimes confusing. Now there are actually different uses for both of these terms. So in Australia, thesis is the document that a student creates to earn a degree at the honors, masters or doctoral level. So for all these levels they use the same term, that is thesis. On the other hand, in the context of the United States and Canada, thesis is the work, research work, produced at the honors or master's degree level, and dissertation is generally used to refer to doctoral work. Now these are two terms, and I have given you an explanation how in Australian context they use the same term for all levels of research, and in United States and Canada they use thesis for honors and master's level and dissertation for PhD. But at the same time we find people using these interchangeably, synonymously, and instead of, you know, using dissertation for PhD, they use the term dissertation for master's level research also. So these terms do not have, you know, a very fixed meaning. They are frequently used interchangeably in place of one another. The next thing that I just want to briefly discuss is two types of thesis: minor thesis and major thesis. Now minor thesis, I have already explained what we mean by thesis. So minor thesis is meant for didactic academic purposes, to teach students certain skills of writing, collecting data and analyzing it, and then obviously making a report. Now minor thesis is, first time when the students are conducting original research. So their research is minor thesis. And in our education, mostly honors level or master's level research is most of the time minor research, where the students are writing minor thesis, where they are conducting research for the first time. So in Pakistani context, we have institutions, universities and colleges where the students are expected to produce research work in their BS or MA. So this is their first time original research activity, where they are supposed to learn these basic skills, and afterwards when they do their MPhil, this is where they can use these some basic skills they have already learned and can produce something very worthwhile and valuable in terms of profundity of ideas. So again, the purpose is development of familiarity with and practice of scholarly conventions of research. So minor theses are assessed within the department by a set of internal criteria. So this is something that is actually managed by the department itself. We do not have an external examiner coming and assessing the quality of the work. It is supervised and examined and assessed by the university and the department, and they have their own varying criteria what students are and will be eligible for this research project, and what kind of research work they are supposed to produce in terms of word length and so on and so forth. At honors level, a thesis is produced within a year alongside the demands of coursework. So these two things continue simultaneously, side by side, their coursework and research work. So this is the last year where the students continue their regular studies, but at the same time they are also doing a research project. And at honors level, the word length of a thesis is approximately 10,000 words. On the other hand, at the master's degree level, thesis requires 1 or 2 semesters of full-time effort. So again, approximately 1 year. But at this level, the word length ranges from 10,000 words to 25,000 words. And there is one thing that I must clarify here is, in international context, since they have honors degree of 4 years, so it is equivalent to our 16 years of education, where honors becomes equivalent to master's degree in Pakistani context. And now all of you know that even Pakistan is trying to implement the same 18 years of education uh, formula in the country too. So they are uh, you know doing away with masters and are bringing people to BS. So in this context, this uh, the point where I have talked about the second point in this slide at the master's degree level. So in our context, it becomes MPhil. So you can see for yourself that the word limit varies from honors level to master's degree level, because this is now the second time when the students are conducting research. They have already done it at the honors level, where they must have learned basic research skills, and now they are better in a position to write a longer research work, and certainly a more mature one. That is why we have this big leap in word length from 10,000 words at honors level to 25,000 words at the master's degree level. And then we have major thesis. Now major thesis is applicable to masters by research, where the degree is actually solely driven by research. It is based on research. So this masters by research thesis is a full-time research over 1 to 2 years, the way we have in the case of MPhil. And this major thesis is examined by experts in the field outside the department, and the word length in this thesis is from 30,000 words to 40,000 words. So again, you can contextualize it in your own education system, where at MPhil level we have external examiner who comes and goes through the work of the scholar, and then passes his own critical judgment on it. And sometimes if he finds certain inadequacies, inconsistencies, drawbacks and flaws in the thesis, he offers his own recommendations to the student to make certain changes in the thesis in order to to make this research work acceptable. And then certainly we have PhD thesis, that is typically produced in 3 years of full-time study, and the word limit here is around 100,000 words. So this is actually where a scholar is supposed to make original contribution to knowledge. This is a long time, large scale research where the student has all the time, 3 years to spend on the same topic. He explores it in great detail, and then on the basis of his genuine mature understanding of the topic and extensive reading and research under the guidance of his learned supervisors, is expected to contribute to the current state of knowledge and introduce some ideas that actually are very useful in the ongoing debate on the topic he has taken for detailed investigation. Now, in the beginning, when I started with the definition of thesis, if you remember, I said that it is an extended argument, and this is actually one of the ideas I want you to focus on and pause over it for some time to absorb it very well, because if you do not grasp this idea, which is, I believe, quite simple and easy to understand, but certainly needs careful attention by the listener, if you do not understand it, you will be a victim of anxiety and stress when it comes to writing your own research article, term paper, or research thesis. Now, the idea is that a good research is always an argument. Now, what we mean by an argument, let me explain it here. A critical position built on reasons to convince an audience. Now, you need to bear in mind this brief but very comprehensive and useful definition of an argument that will help you understand the nature of argument and by extension research. So when it comes to writing down an article, a term paper, or even starting with your research thesis, your supervisor will be asking you to come up with an argument. Now, what he actually means is you need to bring one genuine, critical, analytical idea that is grounded in evidence, data that supports your idea. In simple words, an argument is your own individual interpretation on the topic, your own personal but well-founded opinion on the topic or the text you have chosen for detailed study. So an argument, let me repeat, is a critical position. Now, critical, the adjective here is added to remind you that mundane ideas, ordinary commonsensical ideas, do not qualify for a good research topic. It should be an analytical idea, an idea that is, deep, that is insightful, that is not obvious to all the readers. For instance, if you are reading a text like a novel, a drama, a piece of poetry, and you pass your own judgment on it as a reader, if this is something that is part of the text, too obvious on the surface of the text, it does not qualify for a good research topic. It has to be, your deep understanding of the text that is slightly, if not greatly, striking for others. And an argument actually means that it is an opinion on the text or the topic that in many cases becomes a starting point for debate. You will find other people contesting your viewpoint. But again, let me emphasize that your perspective should be based on reasoning and the reasons, the data, the evidence that you provide to reinforce your viewpoint should be convincing for others. And if something is simply your own personal opinion and you are adamant to your own position regarding that topic, and you do not have any evidence to back up your claim, this is not a critical position to be considered and accepted for a research topic. So it has to be a good, sound idea, an insightful idea, somehow shedding light on an aspect of the text or the topic and illuminating it for others. So you actually bring to the surface an idea that was already not known to most people. I mean, it might be known to some of them, because this is not about coming up with an idea that is simply, magical, that you have actually come upon, that you have discovered. No, this might have been understood by other people, but the way you make a claim and then you read around this topic and make a complete case to convince others of the validity of your argument is what makes your activity a worthwhile research exercise. So you should actually, just to give you an example, consider yourself in the shoes of an advocate, a lawyer, who has his own viewpoint on a certain case in the court, and then he explores this in detail, collects evidence, and convinces the judge presiding over the case of the validity, justifiability of his own argument. So if you convince others, your readers, your examiner, with sound logical evidence, this is what we mean by an argument. Let me again simplify it for you in a few words. An argument is your own analytical personal interpretation of the text or the topic, something that you have discovered on the basis of your own careful, close reading of the topic or the text. So I'm using these two words side by side on the topic and the text, because many a time in literary research the students use a primary text as a foundation of their research. So they offer an interpretation of the text, and this interpretation then drives their research. And similarly, sometimes we have researchers not starting with a text, rather they have a certain perspective on a certain topic, and then they want to explore how valid and justifiable their perspective is. They conduct research, something that makes them curious. So you have to give reasoned accounts of how or why something occurred and then evaluate their outcomes. So you make a claim and then you explore why this is so and what are the outcomes of this perspective. So this becomes a complete study of the topic. Now here there are uh, three things which are most of the time confused with an argument. Whenever the supervisor or the teacher asks the students to bring an argument, what he receives in return is rather something that is non-argument. And here I have talked about three types of non-arguments because these are the most common ones. First is description. So description is not an argument. Description means you offer the audience or the reader a thorough impression of the issue at hand. You describe what something is. And this is something that is not your critical understanding. You're simply saying something that is already there. You're just describing it. You're just using language to talk about how things are. And since this is not an argument, you do not intend to persuade people to your point of view, because this is something that is evident to all the people. For instance, if you are at a place and you observe an activity happening before your eyes and you describe it, this is not an argument. So what instead you need to do is you need to think about it carefully and then understand why something happens the way it does. So in academic writing, if we use description, it should be factual, accurate, and free of value judgment. Value judgment here means you cannot pass a judgment on it, calling it right or wrong, because you're simply describing something that is already there. You have observed it, you have noticed it, and you have expressed it in your own words. So there is nothing analytical about it. That is why this description is not to be counted as an argument. Similarly, we have explanation. Again, it is frequently confused with argument. So explanation is giving details to simplify an idea or a situation. So this is, this follows description. Description is describing something the way it is, and explanation is adding more details to make somebody understand an idea or situation easily. So again, explanation is not meant to persuade people to accept your point of view. So that is why, again, it is not analytical, it is not an argument. The third is summarizing. So summary is a reduced version of longer messages or texts. In simple words, a short version of a long original is what we call summary. So this summary has this repetition of key points, drawing attention to important aspects of the issue. You read something, let's say a long piece of writing, and then you actually reproduce the important points by drawing people's attention to what is the essence of this long piece of writing. And principally there is no new material in summary. When you summarize, you do not bring in your own ideas. It is simply uh, shortening uh, an original piece of writing into a brief writing, or a brief version, a short version. Now these three, description, explanation and summarizing, are certainly used in all pieces of writing, even in research. But the point here is that description, explanation and summarizing is not an argument, which means your research should start with a genuine idea, an analytical idea, and then in order to support that idea, you describe things, you explain, you summarize ideas from other scholars to back up your main argument. Now here I'm going to stop, and I hope that all of you are going to follow this discussion very carefully and understand these ideas I have discussed, and absorb them. By absorbing I mean that whenever you are reading something or making an assignment, you need to actually understand your own writing, your own ideas. Whether you are trying to understand the text in a profound, mature way, or you are simply relying on the surface meanings of the text. So what you need to do is develop better strategies to read the texts and different writings, topics closely, and develop your own interpretation of these things. I hope this discussion was useful for all of you. In the next discussion, I'll be talking about some more ideas on research methodology. Until then, it's goodbye. Thank you.